So moving on now so this is now video number 2, talking about metaphors. So in the article in Philosophy Now magazine, the article that got me thinking about metaphors, the question is raised as to whether if our understanding of the world is based on metaphors we derive from shared experiences, does this mean we cannot understand anything radically different? That's a key question. If all our thinking is based on seeing things in terms of things we already understand, all new discoveries will be enclosed within the old frameworks or schemas. For example, Richard Feynman said of quantum mechanics, "If you think you understand it, you don't understand it." This is because it is too detached from our normal experiences, so no metaphor could help us understand it. Therefore, I wonder whether non-autistics can ever truly understand the autistic experience, and whether autistics can ever really understand the non-autistic experience, because we inhabit such completely different sensory worlds. If that's the case, then it stands to reason that much that has been written about the autistic experience by non-autistics is probably wide off the mark. So, everything they write about, autistics being kind of in a world of their own, kind of, what's the metaphors they use? In a empty fortress, I think, is one of the main metaphors that's often used to describe the autistic experience. Sort of completely cut off, like behind glass, in a shelled metaphor. So these are sort of metaphors that non-autistics often use to try and understand the autistic experience based upon their own framework. But, considering that the sensory world that autistics inhabit is so radically different from the sensory world of non-autistics, and bearing in mind that all metaphors are rooted in this kind of baseline of familiar physical experiences that people of a particular community inhabit, and if you're outside of that community, how on earth can you really understand the other experience, So now I would argue that some, and possibly even many autistics, use metaphor, but metaphor that is not understood because it is idiosyncratic and not part of common parlance. The metaphors we struggle with as a general rule, and I'm being very general here, because everyone's individual obviously, but the metaphors that autistics tend to struggle with are the ones that are part of that sort of shared community of understanding that most people are sort of born into, the sort of social world that most people will just by osmosis pick up without even really needing to try, whereas autistics just are not part of that. We're not part of that wavelength. We're sort of cut off from that. So obviously we're going to struggle to understand those metaphors. But that doesn't mean that we can't use our own metaphors, our own idiosyncratic metaphors. For example, when I was a kid, I absolutely hated rye bread. The only way I could eat it was if I laved it with butter and jam. I also hated sticky, muggy weather that was itchy because of the flies. A bit like the weather today that I've just come back from, as I've been outside earlier. Not very nice day, muggy, lots of flies, rather humid. I instinctively associated the cloying, sticky, greasy, butter-laden rye bread with this weather, and so every time the weather was muggy, I called it a rye bready day. In other words, the readily understood physical experience I endured when eating rye bread was used as a means to understand a more conceptually complex experience of bad weather. However, because my metaphor was not part of a common stock of metaphors understood by others, no one understood me when I talked about rye bready weather. Because I would sometimes, like at school even, I would say, "Oh, it's a rather rye bready day today," and of course no one would understand what I was meaning, because I would just kind of forget, of course they wouldn't know it, so that obviously I would forget that, and I would just assume that people would understand my idiosyncratic sort of meanings. And yet, autistics get all the slack for not understanding metaphor. But I think that's a little bit, not quite the whole truth, really. So do any of you use your own self-generated metaphors? I would love to know, and let me know below. So to conclude then, as an adult, I still have to work harder than most non-autistics to work out the meanings of common metaphors. Metaphors do not come easily to me. As I mentioned, my dad spending all that time with me as a teenager, really helping me to understand innuendo, symbolism, things that I just would never have otherwise understood or worked out on my own, without all that intensive help that I got from my dad. and that helped me get a good grade in my English, because the rest of my verbal abilities are really high. I've got a good vocabulary. I can, all of that's really, really good. I can write using long words. But the thing that I really struggled with was understanding the sort of meanings of texts. So my dad spent ages, going through this with me, using revision books, really structuring it and helping me. And him being an English teacher obviously really helped. If I, because when I was in school, I just had no clue. So that helped me, get that good English GCSE, which I wouldn't have done otherwise. But I still have to work it. It doesn't come naturally to me. And for example, I could give an example here of how it doesn't come naturally to me. The metaphor has the cat caught your tongue. It's like, it makes me feel rather funny. It's like I have to, I can't instinctively tell you what that means without, I have to think. So it's stored. The meaning is stored because I have learned this one in there, but I can't readily access it like straight away. A stitch, I think the other one is a stitch in time saves 9. I have no idea what that means. Seriously, what does it mean? If anyone knows, I would have to Google it later because I actually can't remember. But yeah, some metaphors that people use I just completely forget because it's not natural for me. So my mind completely goes blank if I'm asked to say what these mean, even though I have memorised the sayings, and I actually have quite a few metaphors that I've stored. And as I say, I do sometimes use some of them for ones I do understand myself sometimes. But I always have to look it up again on Google because I do forget them quite easily if I haven't used them for a while or come across them for a while. My mind will often at first go to the literal interpretation before getting to the metaphorical, even if I've heard the saying many times and no longer take it literally. Or sometimes I will take it literally, and then processing will catch up, and a few seconds later I'll realise the true meaning. Because I've been on this planet long enough now to kind of know that some things just don't make logical sense. Which obviously, that processing will then click in, and like, oh god, you have just taken that literally. But my first gut default reaction is often to take things literally, and then it's like a processing delay, and it's like, oh yeah, obviously. I realise the true meaning. So this can be quite funny after the event. I do find it quite funny, after the event, and you're suddenly like, oh my god, how silly. And I've often laughed about taking things literally, although in a moment it can be mortifying. With the metaphors just mentioned, I know, for example, that the cat has not literally got my tongue, because that is totally illogical to me as a well-read high verbal IQ adult. However, I do have an image of a cat and a tongue in my head, and I can't recall what it means without a hell of a lot of effort, because it's just not natural to me. I haven't picked it up by osmosis, I haven't picked it up through shared social understanding. I've really had to work book knowledge, finding out the answers from books. I can't understand the meaning of metaphors just through social interaction. So I have to go through my stored dictionary definitions to arrive at the meaning, and obviously that takes time, so there is that processing delay. So I prefer it if people spoke clearly without using metaphors, although perhaps hypocritically, if I know a metaphor well enough, I will enjoy using it myself because it makes me feel competent and articulate. Sort of a bit like that social copying, mimicking thing going on again. I can fool people that I understand more than I actually do, just because obviously if I have learned something, I do quite like to show it off. I do apologise if I ever use metaphors in my videos that confuse you, because we're all at a different place in terms of what metaphors we understand as autistics, but sometimes I just can't help myself if I've learned one, because I just like to feel socially competent. That urge to fit in, I guess, is masking, camouflaging, I think they call it. So let me know below if any of you struggle with metaphor in the box below. So I'm going to conclude this review now, and next week I will talk briefly, it will be a brief one because I haven't taken too many notes on it, because I'm still trying to understand the concept myself, but I will talk a little bit about recursion, which is the other concept they talked about in philosophy now, and how that might relate to the autistic experience. And I also am hoping to read to you another camp diary as well, because I have another camp diary from when I was in year 5 that you might find interesting. Okay, so I hope you have a good week, and I look forward to speaking to you again next Wednesday, so thank you for watching.